Welcome to the fourth day of the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology, Series 3. I'm here to tell you some stories from a few hidden corners of the web of Celtic myth. There is always a web of connection, but probably no spiders. Yesterday, we started our second story about Bran, son of Feval, a young Ulster king. A strange woman of the otherworld appeared in his court, described the beautiful paradise she came from, and told Bran that he should set sail for it, a place called the Land of Women. So let's see how Bran's getting on. The next day, Bran took to the sea with 3 times 9 men. Over each group, he set one of his foster brothers about the same age as himself. On the 3rd day of sailing and rowing, Bran spied something awfully strange. There was a man in a chariot driving toward him over the surface of the water. Like the lady on the previous day, this man would sing a long song to Bran. But first he introduced himself as Manannán, son of Lair. He told Bran that he had not visited Ireland for long ages, but he was making his way there now. And the reason for his coming to Ireland at this time was his intention to sire a son who would be called Manannán, son of Fiachna, or so he would be called. Then he began his song to the dumbstruck Bran. "Och, Bran beholds the glassy sea, traveling in his coracle, but I've driven far today, and I've seen nothing but a broad, flowering plain. The clear sea which Bran believes he is sailing in his high-prowed boat. I tell you, I've driven over it in my 2-wheeled chariot today, and it is a plain with a profusion of flowers. The waves that Bran believes he sees, gathering in the clear water. No, I see only faultless crimson flowers growing on the plain of sport. Waves like white horses shine as far as Bran has looked in every direction. But no, rivers run with honey in the land of Manannán MacLear. Though you row over the bright, reflective surface of the sea, you are suspended in its pale hue, if only you knew it. I am looking right at it, at a smooth land, blue and yellow with flowers. The speckled salmon you see leaping from the belly of the shining ocean, I tell you, they're my calves and spotted lambs, friendly and gentle. Though you see but one chariot rider crossing this honeyed plain with its many flowers, many horses there are to be seen. If only you could. There is a vast plain indeed, with numerous hosts in bright colored clothing, cloth of silver and gold upon them. They would welcome you with every bounty. They sit at delightful gaming boards, drinking the finest wine. Some turn aside as couples, their union amongst the bushes a sinless act. You never noticed how you sailed over hills and ridges. Oh, there are fruit trees under the hull of your little ship, an orchard of blossom and fruit with the fragrance of the vine, a perfect wood which never grows old, whose leaves shine like gold. Since time began, we have been here, and we do not grow old or go to lie in graves. We do not expect sickness or old age. Sin has not touched us. 'Twas an evil day when the serpent visited Adam. She brought a falsehood and perversion into the world. A world which knew only immortality now finds decay. Adam's greed and lust has slain us, has ruined a noble race. The body grows old and dies. It knows torment and the terrors of hell. Now they say, forget the old gods, be not prideful, be overthrown by sickness and age and destruction of the soul through deception. Then God will send salvation, a fair one from far lands, who's both God and man. Well, that was a trip. We'll follow the conversation between Bran and Manannán further tomorrow, but I think it's good to take it in small doses and look at it closely. Back on the first day, when we were looking at Celtic art, we looked at this mirror, and I mentioned that perhaps there's a kind of dialogue between the fluid nature of the art on the backs of these decorated mirrors. These are quite common especially in Britain, there were lots of them found. So is there a kind of dialogue between the art on the backs of the mirrors and on the other side, the mirror itself? Have you ever looked in a mirror and felt like the world you see in the mirror both is and isn't the world in which you're standing? Maybe you've wondered what it would be like to step through the mirror like Alice. You're experiencing a form of liminality there. The surface of the mirror itself and the reflection, it creates a liminal space. There's something slightly unsettling or magical about it, at least potentially. I think our modern screens create a form of liminality where we may struggle with separating what we see from reality. I know for me, it's very odd spending a lot of time seeing myself on screen when I'm teaching or when I'm editing videos of myself. I can momentarily lose my sense of where I am or when I am. Or maybe you've longed to break through that screen into the images you see, maybe of somewhere you're desperately homesick for, or for someone you'd like to touch, someone you miss or love. Well, water and liminality go together. First, there is the reflective property of the surface. When you see your world or your face reflected in water, you know it's a reflection, but it creates the illusion that your world may somehow be repeated below the surface. Another way water is liminal is the shoreline. Beaches are liminal spaces. I talked about that a lot in the first season of the 12 days. How many liminal spaces are there in this image? Water meeting sand, sand meeting the grass, the horizon. Liminality is everywhere. Doorways, gates, fences. There's a lot of liminality in the later sections of the voyage of Bran. Let's see if we can visualize it. We'll call this line the liminal point, or point of reflection. So here's Bran looking for the land of women. He feels like a heroic figure rowing around on the sea with his foster brothers and his men. But here comes Manannán, and his existence in a two-wheeled chariot doesn't make an awful lot of sense. What he's saying doesn't make an awful lot of sense either. King Bran, in your vessel steering, you think you're sailing over the billows. I, in my chariot, long faring, behold you rowing over a meadow. The sea you see is blue. You see white waves where you are rowing, finest fields of verdant hue under my wheels where I am going. Perhaps we should think of the situation this way. This is how I've kind of always pictured it. Or maybe like this. It's quite a mind-bending scene. And I wonder whether the woman with the silver branch was a sort of messenger from Manannán. If we think back to King Cormac, who also got a silver branch, it was the start of Manannán luring him into the other world. Although it might not seem so at first, Manannán's trickery of Cormac isn't ill-intentioned. Once Cormac follows him, Manannán presents important lessons to Cormac about truth and justice, and gives him a magic cup which can discern truth from untruth. He returns Cormac's wife and children, and Cormac goes on to be a king who is particularly known for justice and fairness. So is Manannán offering some important lesson to Bran here? Because honestly, I don't believe he just happens to bump into Bran by accident. However, at least from where we're standing, what he's teaching Bran is less clear to us. And it's possible that we're missing some vital part of Bran's story. I don't know. Manannán spends 12 stanzas describing to Bran the world that Bran can't see. Surely it must be important. Why is so much emphasis put on this? By Manannán, if you want to look at it that way, or by the storyteller, if you want to look at it that way. Why is this worth 12? Really, they're beautiful, but quite repetitious stanzas of poetry. So this is then followed by 5 stanzas in which Manannán speaks about the coming of Christ quite clearly. So before we get into that, I just want to touch briefly on the topic of Christianity in early Irish mythological literature. So people get very hung up on the problem of the scribes who made the early manuscripts being monastic Christians. Many of you have heard my thoughts on that before. If you haven't, I really suggest that after this, you go and watch that video called Is Celtic Mythology Real? I'll link to it at the end, as it will help you understand the scholarly discussions about this problem. Honestly, this is one of those things that it's impossible to know about for sure. We can't be sure how much of the material in these medieval texts is native lore, perhaps still containing a lot of pre-Christian content. We can't be sure whether the scribes were also authors, creating new works of literature, or whether they were primarily trying to record what had been orally preserved in a body of stories and poems for centuries. And remember, it's their own culture. We can't go, oh, well, here we've got Christian monastics, and here we've got the Irish tradition. These guys grew up in that tradition. So we really need to take this on a story by story or text by text basis. I don't think we can make a blanket statement about it. The school of thought in academic discussions who don't see them so much as authors, but believe that it's old oral lore being preserved, those people are called nativists. And then the ones who see the scribes more as authors are sometimes called non-nativists or anti-nativists. And some people are on the fence. Some people see a lot of nuance where some stories are old lore being preserved and others might be new creations. Or, we kind of see the old lore bubbling up through the literature. Now, there are other uses of the word nativist in other contexts like politics or sociology, so please don't get confused. Within Celtic studies, nativist does not mean things like nationalist or racist. It's just a literary theory. So all I'm really saying is this: the discussion isn't settled. People, especially in internet discussions, have a habit of speaking in very black and white terms, don't they, about things. You may have read something, even an academic paper, that states one position like really strongly, but researchers don't all agree. For quite some time, the non-nativist position has been in fashion. And I have some thoughts about why that might be. I don't necessarily think it's because scholars are getting smarter and have now found the right answer. Among more educated people, and especially in Europe, people have been getting less and less religious over the past century. If you live in some parts of the US, it's easy to forget that. In a society where most people don't follow the dominant religion or any religion, people tend not to be attracted to new theistic ideas. They find the whole thing primitive and a bit laughable. I think that can make them less open to the idea of these texts having what we might call a religious meaning in the polytheistic sense. If we look at the work of some early Celticists from the 19th century and early 20th century, like Sir John Rhys or Gerard Murphy in Ireland, when they're probably committed to the Christian faith themselves, they're very open to early Celtic language texts having important non-Christian meaning. And perhaps that's precisely because they at least believe in some kind of God or religion. Now, there are certainly examples of Christians in Celtic studies in the past who held the opposite view, like Ivor Williams would be an example of that. However, I can't help but think that a lot of the shying away from the possible pre-Christian ideas surviving to be written down in the 7th or 10th century is simply because people can't conceive that it's possible from their very modern European viewpoint. And they often have difficulty, I think, conceiving of their ancient fellow countrymen having a proper religious life with proper mythology at all. So that's a bit of a sidetrack, but I think it's important that you have a little background for understanding my position and a possible way of understanding this text, or of finding different angles toward understanding this text. So let's look at the 5 stanzas about Christianity. We're back to Kudelmeyer here for a nice accurate look. We are from the beginning of creation without old age, without consummation of earth. Hence we expect not that there should be frailty. The sin has not come to us. So he's saying here that we are from the beginning, that we, that is the people of Manannán's world, have always been both immortal, without old age, frailty, or consummation of earth, in other words, death and burial, and that they don't and can't sin. It hasn't come to them. In the next stanza now, he's talking about Adam, although it's not entirely clear. An evil day when the serpent came to the father to his city. So by this he means Adam. We picture Adam in a garden, but this poet has placed him in a city. She has perverted the times in this world, so that there came decay, which was not original. Decay that was not original. That's pretty close to Manannán outright saying, well, your original sin, it wasn't original with us. It's even as if he's saying that the world would have been better off not knowing about this. It's kind of ruined everything. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it. So he's still on about Adam here. By greed and lust he has slain us, through which he has ruined his noble race. The withered body has gone to the fold of torment and everlasting abode of torture. So it's basically all Adam's fault. Adam has ruined the noble race, Manannán's people. It is a law of pride to this world, to believe in the creatures, to forget God, overthrow by diseases and old age, destruction of the soul through deception. So the second stanza is maybe a little harder to unpick. I think what it means is that people now, so by in this world, he means in his present time, they consider it a law of pride, in other words, a bad thing, to believe in earlier gods. I think the creatures means earlier gods or other gods, and bad things will happen if you do. And finally, a noble salvation will come from the King who has created us. A white law will come over the seas. Besides being God, he will be man. So this is spoken almost like a prophecy, which is typical conceit in medieval poetry. So Manannán is sort of predicting Christ's coming, even though the scribe is putting the words in his mouth. So when we go on tomorrow, that will give us some context. So this is Manannán's new reality. For whatever reason, anti-Christian sentiment is sometimes part of Manannán's speech in stories about him. There's evidence that worship of Manannán persisted far into the Christian era. So maybe that's why he's a natural adversary to the new faith. You may know of a story called The Fosterage of the House of the Two Pails. It's really long-winded. I'll give you a link if you want to read it, but it's an undertaking. But it concerns a young girl who's a fosterling of Angus, the Dagda's son. Something happens which traumatizes her, something someone says to her. And in modern terms, we might say she becomes anorexic as a result. She won't eat, seemingly can't eat. And Manannán steps in and goes to great lengths to offer her a special cow to milk. And she can drink this milk. Now, it's significant that this cow doesn't come from Ireland. It comes from India, according to the story. However, one day the girl sort of disappears, and what's happened is that she has strayed out of the world of the Sidhe and into the world of men. And of course, she finds herself in the garden of a monastery. Of course she does. And she hears the gospel and she's able to eat again. And her situation is explained like this. The one all-powerful God caused her not to eat the food of the Tuatha De Danann, and said that when Finvar, this is the guy who insulted her, gave offense to the maiden, she parted from her magic, and that an angelic spirit came into the place of her mind. And he said that is the cause of her abstinence, and that she is of no other people, but the true people of the all-powerful High King, in other words, of God, the Christian God. It's almost like demonic possession in reverse. Being one of the Tuatha De Danann, she's possessed by an angel. And that's all well and good, okay. It's a magical story, but Angus and Manannán really miss this girl. She's like a beloved daughter to them. So, they've taken a lot of care and trouble over her one way and another. So they try to get her back, which they can't. But again, there's an interesting little religious discussion wedged into the story. I recognize her, said Manannán. She's not of Angus people at all, nor of our people either. And it is the three-personed Trinity, which will be the God of worship for that maiden, said he. Now, Mark Williams, who's very much an anti-nativist, by the way, but it's not really relevant to this discussion, has a good discussion of this story in one of his books. So he says this, Manannán, and later Angus too, are shown to be in possession of genuine theological truth from the Christian standpoint. Manannán knows about the Trinity, and elsewhere he indicates that he is well informed about the fall of the rebel angels. Yet both repeatedly, that's both Angus and Manannán, both repeatedly show themselves left unmoved by the knowledge. So they know about the Christian gospel, but they reject it. So the old gods aren't going to just roll over and become Christians. And even the Christian scribes seem to think it would be going too far to write that into their stories. So thanks for listening. Bye-bye. I'll see you tomorrow. If you're enjoying this series, why not take one of my online classes? There's almost always something on offer. Some classes have tiered pay-what-you-can pricing, and there are usually a few scholarships available for the more expensive classes. To get notifications about classes and about scholarships when they're announced, you can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter, or follow me on my Patreon page.